What's up, YouTube? So I got this old magazine here. I'm talking like from way back. I'm talking from 1982, and I was going through this the other day, and I just so happened to come across and see or read. I read this paragraph and that was in part of this article that was in this magazine, and it was about a romance story or article. And I read this paragraph, and I just laughed, or I thought it was kind of funny. Anyway, so I decided to go back and check this out, or see what this was all about and stuff. Uh, the paragraph I read, it was kind of weird. It was really, detailed, kind of steamy and stuff. So I went back, and I don't think I've ever, I don't remember, or I don't think I've ever read any romance stuff. I know it's popular and stuff with women and stuff, but I don't think I've ever read a anything romance or romantic and stuff. So I went back and I want to check this out or read this article and stuff for this story that is in this old or ancient magazine from way back, like 30 plus years ago or whatever, and see what this is about. So I think this will be interesting. This magazine article or story is called A Woman of the World. She wasn't afraid of passion, but if she knew what she wanted, why did she feel like an uncool, terrified virgin? In the high school year 1970, the varsity football team staged an upset at the homecoming game, defeating for the first time in years the school's most hated rivals, but they played to stands that were more than half empty. Football had slipped badly both in status and drawing power. Things had changed on campus. The ruling cliques no longer ruled. Student government discussed civil disobedience instead of prom decorations. Cheerleaders had become jokes. Hoods had become heads. Dorks did drugs and re-emerged as mystics and poets. Social breakdown was everywhere. Of course, such changes had been taking place elsewhere for quite some time, but they had only just begun to filter through to the high school. In its society, customs were more deeply entrenched. The school was one of the many in the Los Angeles suburbs and visually indistinguishable from the rest in its classic 50s Southern California architecture. It was one-storied and sprawling, a series of connecting hallways and lawns with an exterior of pale faded stucco. The halls were covered with scuffled linoleum and lined with dark green metal lockers. Classroom windows looked out to the strips of Bermuda grass and crabgrass. Near the attendant's office, a massive bird of paradise plant bloomed near thick green hedges, trimmed into letters that spelled out the school's name. Physically, little about the school had changed over the years, and the only major innovation had come when technology hit the lunchroom in '67. The old-fashioned cafeteria had been closed. Now students bought their lunches from a series of vending machines. Hot food, hot drinks, cold drinks, snacks, and fruit. They pushed buttons for cartons of orange juice, milk, and lemonade, and pulled levers to release chocolate chip cookies and Kit Kat bars. They peered through tiny plastic doors at club sandwiches, and styrofoam dishes of hardened spaghetti or glutinous macaroni and cheese at French dip sandwiches, and Salisbury steak. When the machines swallowed their quarters and gave nothing in return, they kicked and shook them, yanked at their plastic doors, and shouted in outrage, then gave up, pulling out more change and consoling themselves with corn nuts and Hostess fruit pies. Seniors had off-campus lunch privileges. It was strange to look at the school from the outside, at the groups of loud, frantic students held back from the quiet street by a chain-link fence that in no way seemed strong enough to contain them. In fact, from the outside, Lauren was convinced the school closely resembled what many students called it, jail. Lauren was 16. It was possible to look at the faces and bodies of some of the other seniors and see, like lightly sketched outlines, the early traces of the women they would become. But Lauren still had the soft, unmolded look of a girl. She had no identifying style, wore her light brown hair parted in the center and hanging straight and fine to the middle of her back, dressed in jeans and plain sweaters or mini dresses, and looked slightly uncomfortable in everything she wore. She left little visual impression behind. Even her prettiness was unfocused, blurry, as if the bones in her face hadn't quite set. The new high school social order had presented no problems to Lauren because she had no place in the old one. She hadn't been an outcast, just always a little outside, a peripheral figure who moved along the edges of the various crowds, friendly with them all but never really belonging to any of them. She was quiet, an observer, outwardly too timid even to consider what some of the other students were doing, going to strange parties in Hollywood, or demonstrations at UCLA, or tripping at free concerts in Venice. But deep inside were none of the continued on 119. But deep inside were none of the others could see. She knew she was wilder than any of them. On nights when the Santa Anas kicked up, she stood in her back yard, bare toes curled into the crackly grass, and imagined herself with black wings, undersides veined like plant leaves, opened and covering the stars, extending her arms, fingers, spread. She saw herself in the sky, laughing, singing, and shouting as she caught and rode the currents of hot wind. Mr. Royer understood. "You are a true free spirit," he wrote at the poem Flight. She turned into him. Mr. Royer taught literature and creative writing. He was tall, angular, homely, and unlike the other teachers, mocked the very idea of hall passes and tardy slips. He told his classes he was mad. They knew he was a genius. He was writing a novel that he talked about so deprecatingly It was undoubtedly going to be a masterpiece. He was 50. He'd been teaching at the school for 28 years. The writing class met just before lunch. After the bell rang, a small group of students always stayed on. After Mr. Royer praised her poetry twice, Lauren gave up off-campus burgers and joined them. They pulled their desks into a small circle at the back of the room, collected money, and sent an emissary to the fruit machine. While they ate, they talked about literature and life, about books Mr. Royer didn't teach in class, Jean Christophe, the plague, and Anna Karenina, and in air sharp with the smell of oranges, they found heroes, the passionate Jean, Dr. Rioux, defiantly alive in the face of death, Anna, who gave her life for love. Lauren also found Peter. They had been classmates since junior high, and their crowds had always been different. Peter had been a jock, but recently had given up track for long hair, pacifism, and poetry. Now, like Lauren, he didn't fit anywhere. His track fans didn't talk to him anymore because they thought he'd turned into a brain. And the brains, who'd all turned into hippies, didn't take him seriously because they still thought of him as just one more blockhead athlete. One day during lunch, he read aloud a poem he'd written called Night. While he read, his eyes met Lauren's, and there was a moment of connection across the desks. She knew that here was someone like herself who stayed up late staring out a suburban bedroom window, trying to make out the distant dim outlines of something he wanted but couldn't name, something for which they both were waiting. Maybe this was it. She stopped thinking of him as a jock. He stopped not thinking anything about her. They both were dreamers. Three spirits, part of Mr. Royer's inner circle. It was a perfect match. On their first date, they went to see a foreign film about fascism and resistance. The fascists won. It depressed them so much they spent 2 hours driving around the city talking about the things they feared most: repression, nuclear war, compromise. Peter parked his yellow van in front of Lauren's house and turned off the engine. From someone's backyard, a dog barked. They got out and stood looking at the sky. The street lamp, shining through trees, stripped their faces with light and shadow. That movie, said Lauren. I know. Alright, so this is actually a pretty long story or magazine article. So I will continue this in the next part.